Hello and welcome to our Voices in Montessori podcast, brought to you by the Greenspring Center for Lifelong Learning. Please subscribe to our podcast so that we can continue to support your important work. As Dr. Montessori said, an education capable of saving humanity is no small undertaking. We agree. So let's get to work. I'm Tamara Sheasley Ballas, and in today's episode, we're talking about the planes of development and how educators can support families in better understanding these planes so that the families can use these planes as a guidebook as their child ages. My guests today are Junnifa Uzodike and Simone Davies. Simone is the author of The Montessori Toddler and co-author of The Montessori Baby, which are comprehensive guides to raising toddlers and infants in the Montessori way. The books are based on her 15 years of experience working as an AMI Montessori teacher in Sydney and Amsterdam. Simone also has a popular blog, Instagram page, and podcast called The Montessori Notebook. Today, Simone is joining us from the Netherlands. Junnifa is the founder and head of school at Fruitful Orchard Montessori in Abuja, Nigeria. She is also the co-author of the Montessori Baby book, which has been translated into over 15 languages. She is an AMI-trained Montessori guide for 0 to 3, 3 to 6, and 6 to 12 levels, and also serves on the board of the Association Montessori International. Today, Junnifa is joining us from Nigeria. Simone and Junnifa have a new book coming out called The Montessori Child, which I am eagerly awaiting. Welcome, Simone and Junnifa. So I'm so excited, Junnifa and Simone, to have you on our show. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here too.
And I'm delighted to be back on the podcast with you, Tamara.
I know, right? This is your second visit. You're actually our first person, Simone, to ever come back for a second visit. So it's a moment. It's a moment. So, okay, so let's dig right in. So you all have great information in your new book about the planes of development and how those planes of development can help our families if we share the information with them. So Junnifa, do you want to start us off by talking about how those planes of development can be impactful for our families in a Montessori community?
Sure. So we have found the planes of development to be a really great tool that we can share with our families. When we think about a Montessori school, the classes are segmented based on the planes of development. The teachers are trained to respond to the children based on their characteristics. The environments are set up to meet the child's needs for every plane of development. But many times parents don't have that view of their child that Dr. Montessori gave to us, that understanding that children in different planes, the same child, as they go through the planes of development, are different. A 1-year-old is very different from, let's say, a 7-year-old. In fact, a 1-year-old is different from a 4-year-old because one of them is unconscious in their learning. They're following their inner drive, and one of them is more conscious about what they're doing and what they're learning. They're a conscious worker. So if you're trained, then you understand that. But then being able to share that with your parents, understand with a parent, understanding that a child in the first plane has an absorbent mind where they're taking in everything without effort. And then understanding that in the second plane is a little bit different, right? They have a more reasoning and logical mind where you tell them something in the first plane and they accept it without arguing. In the second plane, the same child will argue or how or wants to get more details. Understanding that the child in the first plane that is in the sensitive period for order and had everything where they were supposed to be is now a really messy child because they're in the second plane. So that understanding is very helpful in the way that we approach the child, in the way that we respond to the child. So I think that having a good understanding of what, in a way it manages expectations, but it also empowers our parents because then they know what to expect from the child, and they know how to respond to the child. They understand that the child actually very similar. So their adolescent is similar to a toddler, or similar might seem like how they were when they were toddlers. So just having that understanding of the child, and then understanding how we should approach the child, I think is a gift that we can give our parents. And if you've worked with parents, and everyone who's listening to this works with parents, I assume, you know that we can do everything we want to do in the school or in the classroom. But if we're not collaborating with our parents and they're not doing their part at home, it can be a struggle. So I think when we give our parents this gift of this tool that is the 4 planes and this understanding of their child, we really empower them to be partners and collaborators in supporting their children to their full potential.
That's so beautiful. And I had not ever thought of it that way. Simone, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
Well, I think that the families that I am in touch with, that we know and we work with all the time, they're really wise. So I love to actually show them some of the diagrams that Dr. Montessori presented in Perugia of like the constructive rhythm, and actually show them, like, see how these triangles, there's 2 blue triangles, they're the more calm periods. Here's the red triangles. This is the more volatile periods. So you can see that they're parallel planes. And I use all of this vocabulary just like I would give them a mini lecture basically on the 4 planes of development. And they really then understand, because I know when I did my training and we had that lecture for the 4 planes, it was really like, it was a comprehensive lecture, but it wasn't a guidebook, but it really felt like a guidebook for me as I like went through. Now my children are 23 and 21, and having seen the children go through those 4 planes, it is really that you do see how the characteristics change. And that means that I know how to support my child. So just as we change the environment, as we do for the in our classrooms, we can also do that at home. Yeah. So like Junnifer said, a 2nd plane child might be externally not so ordered, but how can we create order in the environment just like we do in our Montessori classroom, so that, because we live in a family, we have everyone with different needs. So as if they're going to do their big work and stretch out, how can we come to an agreement in our house that it gets tidied up by the end of the day or over the weekend, or in the school holidays, maybe they can have some more grace and build a whole Lego village. But at the end of the holidays, that we come back to a family. And also I love to set up systems. So to understand how I can support like an adolescent who is not really thinking about so many practical things because they're in such a social plane of development. How am I going to get them to remember to turn off the lights and lock the doors? Well, I'll just have a little simple sign on my door that says lights and locks, so that if they're the last person to leave the house, that my house isn't left with the door wide open, which may have, or may not have happened in my house. And, you know, you can just take this as information. Okay, they obviously don't have this skill, or they've forgotten this skill, and we can help build and scaffold skills as we go along and support them. So basically the parent or the caregiver becomes the guide, just like we are in the Montessori classroom. It's such a helpful framework.
And so do you do that for them from the very beginning? Is that something that you're in school settings you're offering when at back to school night, or is that an individual conversation? How do you bring that to families as you move along? And Simone, do you want to start with that one, and then I'll follow up with Junnifer?
Yeah, usually at the moment it's come up one-to-one. And like I like to say, the parent kind of who says, my child doesn't want to get dressed anymore. And I'm like, are they 2.5 years old? And basically it's just really interesting that the child who had the unconscious absorbent mind and is starting to transition into the conscious absorbent mind, they start to show resistance. So then I can talk to them about why it might be different, and how they maybe were so pleased with, you know, learning how to get dressed, but now we need to work and collaborate with them. And Junnifer and I always use this framework that it starts with dependence on us, you know, when they're babies, and then we start doing collaboration where we're working alongside our child, and then they take over to independence. And that means that we're always working with the child, just like we are in our Montessori classroom, rather than dictating and that kind of thing, or we're coming to agreements with them. And so if a family's got an older child, they might ask a question. And then again, I can say, okay, well, when they were in the 1st plane of development, they had an absorbent mind. And now, like Junnifer says, now they've got the reasoning mind, and they want to understand those moral differences. That's why they're saying, you know, they are allowed screen time and we don't have screen time in our house. And then we can talk about why they're coming up with these kind of questions. Or I had a conversation just yesterday with a mother who said, 20 times before we even got to class, they asked me why, and this child's like 3 years old, and again they're trying to understand everything that they took in the first subplane, that 0 to 3, the first 3 years, and now they're wanting to understand it. And the why of a 3-year-old, we can then explain why that's different to the why of the 6-year-old who was actually wanting to understand the moral differences.
Thank you. That's very, very helpful. Junnifa, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, so for your question, for me, I run a school where we serve children from 0 to 12. So it comes for us both ways. We run workshops and parent education nights or Saturdays where we sit down and we explore this topic in different ways. Even when we talk about preparing the environment, we look at it from the lens of the planes of development. So we might have, how would you prepare the environment for a toddler? How would you prepare the environment for a 3 to 6-year-old? How will you, as your child goes through the planes of development? So we usually start the year with a workshop where we go over how your child is different, and how they need different things. We even talk about how a seed, a seedling, a plant, we use those examples when we're having the conversation with the parents. So the different topics we explore in workshops. We also send out newsletters where we address this sometimes. So we might look at an aspect, we might look at an age group. When we have transitions, like in Nigeria, we have our school year is in terms. So we have different terms where we have new children moving to a new level or new families joining the school. That's usually the conversation that we start off with. But in addition to that, we also have, situations like Simone, where the parents want to, they have a concern, or we observe something and we think that, this is information that might be useful to them. One big thing that Simone already touched on it a bit is when the child seems to be behaving, 1 minute they're a certain way, another minute they're another way. So often when we talk about the planes of development as Montessori teachers, we know that it's 0 to 6, 6 to 12, 18, 12 to 18, and 18 to 24. But we also know that the child doesn't swap on their birthday. Sometimes, it starts early where they start to show some of the characteristics of the next plane, or they're 7 years old but they're still showing some, or 6.5 or 7, and they're still showing some characteristics of the first plane. And sometimes that's when it's hardest for the parents, because it almost feels like the child is neither here nor there. So having those conversations about how it's a transition, they don't just switch, they're gradually switching. And as parents, we have to show grace, because we know, right? We know what's happening. The child doesn't know. One moment you feel like they're so capable, another moment you feel like, why are you behaving like that? So when parents come to us with their concern, we can point back to that. And it usually helps, especially if they've attended a workshop where we've talked about it. We might refer to it, or we might, bring out, if we usually have like handouts that we might have shared. So we address it in many different ways in our interactions with our families, because it's such a integral part of our work. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love that. I love that framework and having that be from the very beginning. And so let's dig into the different levels. And let's talk about first, you have these little tiny humans, the infants and toddlers. What are the tips? What are the tools? What's the guidebook that you're giving to your families around the planes of development for these littlest people? And Junnifa, we'll start with you this time, and then we'll swing over to Simone.
Sure. Simone and I wrote the Montessori baby book, where we touched on a lot of these. And I recently doesn't feel so recent now that she's 9 months old, but I have a baby again after a long time. So these are top of mind. I think, like, in working with families, the biggest thing I've seen with babies is that I like to communicate with families is just how capable children are. They're so capable, but often I feel like because they look helpless in a way, and they cry so loud, and they're not able to communicate with us in words. They communicate. They're capable of communicating if you're observing and you're paying attention, but they're not speaking in the way that we're used to. So it's easy to assume that they're not able to do anything, and then you want to do so much, or you don't give them the opportunity to do the things that they're able to do. So I think, like, for me, that's usually the first thing that I help parents understand, is that children are truly, including babies, are very capable. They're capable of offering you their hands when you want to when you want to put clothes on them. They're capable of opening their mouths. Like if you offer them a spoon, it's into their mouth. If you just offer, they will open their mouths. They're capable of communicating. Like, so if you speak to them and you just pause, you'll see that they'll actually respond to you. They're capable of keeping themselves busy for extended periods of time. Like, if you prepare the environment, they actually like exploring. You don't have to entertain them. They are actually capable of doing things for themselves. So I feel like when parents just understand that children are capable, and it starts because if you have that mindset from when your child is a baby, you'll grow with that. You'll always give them the opportunity to be as independent as they can be, and your eyes will be open to see that, because their capability continues to increase, right? But you first have to believe that they're capable. And then as you believe that, you'll start to understand that they're communicating with you, even when when they can't speak. You'll notice that they're stretching I'm saying this one because, like, the lady who helps me with my daughter, sometimes she was surprised when I told her to just pay it. Like, when you're trying to put her clothes on her, just offer it to her and see what happens. And she was shocked because she actually offers you her head and you put it in. And if you wait a bit, you'll see her stretching her hands to put inside. And if you don't realize that she's capable of doing that, you're forcing the clothes over her and she's crying and you're wondering why she's crying. And it's because she knows that she can do it, and you don't know that. So I think that helping parents see what children are capable of and understanding that human beings are always searching for independence in different ways and in different levels in the different planes. So understanding what are the ways that we can offer our children independence. And like Simone says, it starts from dependence. We're feeding them, but then gradually they want to hold the spoon for themselves. They want to hold the cups for themselves. They want to, climb onto something for themselves instead of you carrying them. So knowing that and looking out for the opportunities, they want to make a choice. They don't want you to you can offer them 2 shirts and they can choose one. So helping our parents understand the possibilities of capacity, like what children are capable of doing, helping them understand that and helping them know, and helping them learn how to observe, because you won't see these things. Even though you might know, you have to observe to notice and to see them. So I feel like those are the first big ones that I like to explore with families.
Thank you for that. That reminded me so much of in the RIE training. They talk about with the infants that you tell them what you're going to do every step of the way. Because our tendency, I think, as human beings, is we see this precious little perfect human and we want to do everything for them rather than really exploring what they're capable of and giving them as much responsibility as we can, even as these little tiny human beings. And so I really appreciate that. And that stood out to me when I was a young mom. It was a long time ago. But just that sense of saying, okay, let's change you now, and pausing and giving that moment so that the child can respond, and that builds that connection for the rest of their life, right? They forever. Because I will tell you, one of my hardest things is to watch people parent when they're not doing, they're on their phone, they're half there, they're half present in this child, like meals, right? You're watching in the right, and I feel for these people and the little people so much, because they're missing these windows, and so much of it comes out of not knowing. So I love going back with the families and making sure, because I think educators have to remember, we don't sometimes I work at a school, and we can be nervous about stepping into those conversations, yet they see us as the expert, and it is our responsibility to support our families in learning this, because it may not have been a part of their upbringing. So anyway, so Simone, how about you? What would you like to add about supporting educators in supporting families with the plane of development, infant and toddler, that first 3 years?
Yeah, so the one that comes to mind for me is order, and we know how important order is for the first plane child. But in our homes, we often do things in different ways every single time. So for example, one day we diaper our child over here and the next over there, where if we can introduce the family from birth to say, these are points of references. Your voice is a point of reference for the young infant for when they transition from in utero to out in the big world. If you've got older siblings and they talk to the baby, or they read to the baby, or they sing their favorite songs, or you play music together, these are going to be points of reference when the baby transitions as well. And then when you set up your feeding spaces, this is the place that I always sit to feed. This is the place where they play, and you have consistent areas of your home. Then as they transition from baby to toddler, the toddler is going to be much more relaxed. They're going to know exactly where to take their shoes off and put them by the door. They're going to hang their little jacket onto their hook. And all of those things just we do it automatically in our Montessori environments, but we forget sometimes to teach the parents or their caregivers why these things are important. It might look cute at a Montessori shelfie, but actually, why do we set up trays like that? So the child can have functional independence. And why is functional independence so important in the first plane, as they will later want mental independence as they move into the second plane, and social and economic independence in the third plane, and the last plane where they want spiritual independence as well. So I think that points of reference and understanding the sense of order, it can be something really helpful for families to understand in those early planes too.
So what I'm really hearing from the two of you is order and independence are the two that you really are supporting families in understanding as kind of cornerstones for that age. And Junnifa, I'm saying, when you say capability, I'm saying, right, seeing their capability and supporting that independence. Is there anything else for that age before we move on to primary and 3 to 6 that you feel like is really important for our families to know, and from either of you?
I think I mentioned observation. I think, with all the areas, I think observing your children, helping our parents know really to understand your child. I mean, you can have frameworks, you can have, milestones, whatever the parents use to apply it to your own child. You have to observe your child so that you get to know them. You have to step back, like as you're spending time with them, just stepping back and looking to see, because you can look and not see. So looking to see and helping our parents, learn how to observe. It's something that even as teachers is something that we have to learn, right? How to not make subjective observations, but instead objective observations where you're really just looking to see, not bringing your biases and your judgment into it. So for me, that really underpins all of the other areas. Like, so to support your child's independence, to support order, you also have to observe, because you might set up a system or set up a process that is not working for your child. But the only way to notice it and to make changes, or to notice when order is a problem, is observation. So I think really helping parents observe, or, understand the importance of observing, and also teaching how to observe, for me, is very useful.
Okay, so can I ask you a follow-up question about that?
Sure.
What are the tools, what are the skills that you teach the parents when you're working with parents about observation? Because I have to tell you, I have 2 Montessori credentials, and I don't feel like I learned to observe until much, much later. And so we say, oh yeah, we're observing. And yet, let me tell a quick story. So I was standing in the airport the other morning with my daughter, and who's 18, and we were watching this little tiny, he had probably, I don't know, 12 months maybe 14 months. And the parents, this was, 5 a.m., right? So this little guy is kind of fussing a bit, and they hand him a snack in a little container. And he tries to open it and put his fingers in there, and he can't get it. And then he starts to fuss. So they don't see that he's trying to actually, they're not observing, right? They're not observing. And so what they hear is what they see is they've handed him this and he's fussing still. And they're not recognizing that. So they take it away from him and put it away. And then he really is upset. Like, he's like, wait a second, you just took my snack. And so finally the dad takes it out, hands it back to him, because he's like, I want this, right? Hands it back to him. Same thing happens, that they don't recognize that he can't get any of the snack out of there. And then he's trying to communicate his frustration. And it really was this perfect moment to realize that everyone in the scenario was doing their absolute best. This family was trying so hard to take care of their little human, but they weren't observing, and they weren't taking the time to say, what's he really communicating here? They just wanted him in that moment to be quiet. Right? As we're standing in the security line, packed like sardines, right, at the airport. And so how do you teach families to observe? What an important skill. And what are the secrets there?
Okay, so I'm not going to say that I'm an expert of this, because even as you were speaking, I think that for me, it has been easier to observe my younger children, because as you were speaking, I was just thinking about an incident with my son earlier today, and I'm just wondering what I missed for how he was behaving. Sometimes in the moment, I have to say that sometimes in the moment, it can be challenging to step back. But I think that if we have that mindset that usually there's something there's a logical explanation. There's usually something the child is communicating to us. They're not trying to offend us. They're not trying to get on our nerves. They're trying to figure things out. They're new. They're in this brand new place that they have never been before. And even though it seems so logical to us, it's not as logical to them. So I feel like coming from a place of grace, first of all, helps us. Like, so when you already have that mindset that I just want to understand this human that is figuring things out, the mindset for me is the first thing. Knowing that your child is a unique individual that you have never met before. You don't know them. I know you think you do, but you don't. And you don't know them in every situation possible. There are many situations that you haven't seen them in. So to get to know them, you have to actually watch them and try to understand them. And I remember something that I read from Dr. Montessori, where she says that, I think she talked about a scientist falling in love with the things that they study. Like, as you observe and you understand your child, you actually will fall in love with them. So when you observe, it's actually an act of love for me. That's how I see it, because you're making an effort to truly understand your child. So from a like, I feel like if you just have that mindset, first of all, and then practically, I think it's one of those skills that get better as you do it. Like, so consciously making an effort, setting aside time to observe. Maybe you want to observe your child when they sleep, like, how do they sleep? I just want to see how this child sleeps. How do they eat? Like, step back and observe. Like, sit on your hands. Normally, I feel like a lot of people, you just want to step in. When something happens, you just want to, we have this, I want to fix it. When you come with that mindset, like, I really don't understand. I want to learn. I want to understand what's happening. I want to get to understand my child. So you sit back and just write what you see. And for some people, it's not writing. I think it's actually helpful to learn how to observe when your child is younger. Nowadays, many people take pictures and videos. And I know that it can feel somehow to have people always, but I think that it can actually be a way to observe, because sometimes if you're doing it consciously as an observation tool, like just recording and then going back to watch it again and see, what am I really seeing? Because in that moment, you may not see it, but what are you seeing when you look at it again outside of that moment. And then reflecting, like sitting down and thinking about what you saw, with an open mind, and just, again, always having in mind that your child is not trying to frustrate you. Your child is not like they are not. So I think if you have that mindset and then practice it, make it a constant practice, set time to do it, observe the different parts of your child's day, especially if it's a day, or if it's a part of the day, or maybe an act, something that comes up often. So maybe if you say something like, she never eats dinner, she's always crying during dinner. That's something that you want to understand. Instead of saying, I need to fix it, it's something that I need to take care of, or I need to find a solution to. Maybe the first step is, I need to understand what's going on. And then I'm going to observe what happens around dinner today, and start from the beginning of the process. Don't try to solve it as you're observing in that moment. Just try to see what is happening. Write it down. What do you see happening? And then reflect at another time. Almost always, I dare say always, you will see something that you had not seen before, or you will understand something that you had not understood before, which might be crucial. I feel like even that family, if they did not figure it out then, I feel like if they took time later to just ask themselves, I wonder what was going on with him that he was crying so much, it might allow them reflect and see. So I feel like those are what have worked for me. Schedule it, put a time. I make it like something that you schedule. I observe, observe. If you have multiple children, observe your children when they're spending time together. What is their interaction? There's so many things that you can observe when they're younger. You might be observing, okay, how they sleep, how they eat, how they move, their hands moving, how they interact with the environment. But as they get older, sometimes it's actually the intangible things, like how they interact with others, how they respond when they're upset, what about, like, if there's, when you transitions, like, so when you're going out in the morning, how does the morning work for your child? How do they wake up? Understanding all of those things would really help you know how to respond to your child. No, observing and understanding helps us respond instead of react. Many times we're reacting. So when we commit to responding instead of reacting, I think it helps. I hope that helps.
Oh, that's lovely. Yes, very helpful. I love the idea of scheduling it especially. And one of the things we often say is children do well if they can, right? So we know that children do well if they can. So we are observing as bringing curiosity, grace. Beautiful. Simone, anything you'd like to add to any of that?
Oh, we love observation. When I work with families in the classroom, I get to actually explain that in a classroom setting, when they're coming with their child, this is a great time to practice. And we might just focus on one aspect, like let's just look at their fine motor and gross motor development. And then when they're at the airport and our child's melting down, that's more like the advanced situation where more things are out of control. And then you might remember to kick into the, oh, I'm collecting data right now, as opposed to reacting right now. And so when I explain that we're being like a scientist, putting on our Montessori glasses and collecting data, parents kind of get that. Yeah. So that's another way to look at it too.
What a great tool, right? To say, because everybody can relate to being a scientist. And it helps us to take that pause, that deep breath we need when we're so embarrassed. Because what's happening, right, is we're centering ourselves in our own feelings when we get embarrassed that our child's screaming at the airport and all of those things. So thank you, thank you. Okay, so we're going to transition now to Children's House or primary, ages 3 to 6. Simone, can you share with us what are the guidelines? What are the tools that you share with families specific to that age?
Well, if we haven't already mentioned it to them, it's really important for them to understand that the child has an absorbent mind. And so they're picking things up, that they're that conscious absorbent mind. So again, that they're consciously taking in everything that they want to understand, everything they took in the first years. And what's interesting is they want to classify now and sort those kind of things. So they're sensorial learners and they learn with their hands best. And a lot of people are wanting to move to technology and to screens already, and why it's so important that we experience that that young child still experiences firsthand and makes the discoveries for themselves. Setting things up so the child can be capable. So just as Junnifer mentioned how capable a baby can be, the 3 to 6 child, you know, they can take care of their environment. They can dress themselves. They really feel empowered. They can use a sharp knife in the kitchen. They can set the table. They can be involved in making pancakes. So we keep showing them how capable the children are, importance of sensorial, and that we wanted them to explore as much as possible with their hands and make discoveries for themselves. And how the social development starts as well. Like in the first 3 years, you see a lot of parallel play, but then you start to see children interacting with each other, but they don't necessarily have the skills, which is when grace and courtesy comes in. And so we can actually also present to the adults, okay, well, in the first 3 years, you might have been modeling it, and you don't have to say, what do you say, you know, when they're meant to say thank you or please. We just trust that the child is absorbing your beautiful example right now. And then from 3 to 6, how you can actually practice, you know, with your child. I love meal times, for example, with families. So you were talking about how sometimes, you know, families are at a restaurant and they're on their telephones, and actually there's opportunities. Oh, could you please pass me the beans from the other end of the table? And then I can model how I'm using my knife and fork, how I drink with 2 hands, or how I pour myself some more, or how I offer someone the last one. Or would anyone else like this last one before I take it? So there's so many things that I think the parents can pick up for the 3 to 6 child that they may not have consolidated already in the younger years, and then that is so important before they move into the next plane of development.
Yes, yes, yes. And wouldn't it be wonderful if they all had those skills?
Which is why we wrote the book, so that they do. Like, this is like, these are some grace and courtesy lessons. These are some things to observe your child. And so we actually have written down things that they basically will get our Montessori training, but at a level that's helpful for adults, you know? We wanted a handbook when we were Montessori trained. It would be really useful. So we're just like making all of this wisdom, Montessori wisdom, accessible to families.
I tell you what, you know this, Simone, but I love both of your other books, right? You have the Montessori baby and the Montessori toddler. Both of them have so much great information that you all have. It's jam-packed and it's simple, easy to read. So I am already, I can't wait. To actually have the Montessori child, I think. And then can you do the Montessori adolescent?
We've kind of already done that. So in the what's next chapter, we've got a 20-page introduction to adolescence, which is more than enough for families. It deals with everything. Like, it's kind of going back to our planes of development. We talk about how they're a newborn again. They're a social newborn this time. And I love that Dr. Montessori describes them as fragile as a newborn. And it makes us kind of, instead of thinking they should know better, this child is also having a hard time, and how can I support them? You know, just like how volatile they were in the first plane of development when there were so many changes going on and they were growing and changing. Now we've got hormonal changes, we've got changes in social relationships. They're feeling a lot of things, but they're also so capable. So I loved learning about the Erdkinder program in Sweden, where the children are actually on the farm and taking care of the farm, and the adults are just there to support them. And you realize these children are managing the budget, they're cooking their meals. If the light goes out, they have to change a lamp, otherwise the lamp never gets changed. If they want to buy a new animal, they have to work out how they're going to house it. Then they have lessons that are associated with things that are important to them. And, you know, showing families that, yes, we all don't go and live on a farm, but how can our child, our adolescent, feel like they can contribute to society? How can they contribute to the family, and how can they take more responsibility? Because a lot of you teenagers are just being run around to sport practice, and they don't really have any responsibilities or feel like they belong. And that's one of our big things that we have in Montessori, is that we make every child feel like they belong and that they're important. So if it's a child who, for example, is passionate about the environment, how can they, you know, join together with other adolescents and raise money or go to a protest march or something like that? Or if they see an injustice, they can maybe make a petition and they can put it into the local government, or can they work on something that is important to them?
Yes, yes, yes. Well, I have 2 of those in my house. to those people. And all of those things are critical. They have to feel like they have meaning and purpose. And there's a great book called Escaping the Endless Adolescence. And it talks about, now it's probably a decade old now, but he talks about how culturally, at least in the United States, we are costing our teens their accepting and taking responsibility, and through them not having meaningful, purposeful work. And it's just what you're talking about, the sports, things that about achievement and status, and rather than actually, what does it mean to be a part of the community? How do you take care of your community, and how are you important to the community? So anyway, so Junnifa, let's circle back. I know we're all over the place here because there's so much that we want to talk to you all about, but let's circle back to the children's house and the primary. And is there anything else you want to add around those guidelines for that age and what you work to give families? And then if you'd like to add on to the adolescent conversation, and then we'll cycle back to the elementary afterwards.
Well, I have more experience with the children's house than the adolescents. Simone is our resident adolescent expert because she has studied it and also lived it. So I will just talk to the children's house. I think, again, for me, it's the same focus on independence and that journey of understanding that we're collaborating with our children and guiding them towards independence. I think you'll be surprised that even when children are 3 to 6, there's so much that they can do that they don't get the opportunity to do. And that understanding, I feel like something that helps parents understand the importance of allowing children do the things that they think they can do and just giving them the opportunity to figure out if they can do it is when they think about the future. So thinking about, I like to think with my children, I like to think, you know how like maybe you have an account that you open for your children and you're depositing money into it so that it's like their savings that they will collect later. For me, I like to think of my children as having a self-confidence and sense of self account, like a box. And so every time you give them those opportunities to be independent, to learn a skill, to apply a skill that they know, to stretch themselves, I feel like you're making deposits in that account for their self-confidence and their sense of self. I think that you're also modeling to them because they have the absorbent mind, right? They're absorbing from you that belief that they can do things, and even if they don't get it right, it's okay. They can fail and they can try again. All of those things, that understanding, that mindset, I think that they are established or they start, it starts in the early years of life. So having that mindset and helping parents understand that, when we give our children those opportunities, that's what we're doing. I think it's really helpful. I love practical life. I love cooking with children. I feel like for the 3 to 6 age group, actually for the entire span of the planes of development, like cooking with your children can be such an opportunity to teach them so many things, whether you're thinking about behavior, like, teaching them patience, teaching them being careful, teaching them precision, diligence. So whether it's soft skills or, more academic skills, teaching them math, building their vocabulary, introducing them to an interest in science, talking about culture, spending time with them and building your relationship with them. Whatever you're trying to do with your children or achieve with your children, cooking with them, you can find a way to fold that thing into it. So I think that, eating with your children, eating dinner with your children is amazing. Even more amazing is finding time to cook with them every now and then. I just feel like there's so much that you can build with that experience of spending time together. So that's what I'll add. And in the book, we talk a lot about that, like activities that you can do. Because many times when people think about Montessori and applying Montessori to their children, I feel like especially with social media, the first thing that comes to mind for many people is just setting up a shelf or like preparing the environment. And those are really important. But I think just understanding your child and spending time with them and taking advantage of the opportunities that you already have, like if you guys have to eat. So how can I how can I Montessori my life with my children, So I feel like that's I think we share a lot of ideas in the book of how you can be a Montessori parent just with what you already have in your environment through living. How can you live Montessori instead of creating Montessori, if that makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just want to make sure, Simone, do you have anything you want to add to that before I
think we've covered the 3 to 6. Yeah, that's great.
Great. Now, did you want to add anything, Junnifa, about adolescence?
Well, I haven't experienced living with an adolescent, so anything I'm sharing honestly from a theoretical perspective. But I think Simone has talked about most of it. And I mentioned earlier that whole idea that, I feel like adolescence gets a bad rap. But from everything that I've read and studied about adolescence, I feel like if we have more understanding or more knowledge about what the child is going through, the characteristics, what they need, then I think that we might actually enjoy. It sounds like it would be it could be, most of it could be more enjoyable to more families if they just understand, that the child is behaving, the things that you think the ways that you think they're behaving that don't seem attractive to you. There's usually an explanation for it, and there are ways that you can set up your home environment and set up yourself, because you're part of the child's environment. Set up yourself as an adult so that you're what they need in that moment, because you understand them. And as Simone mentioned, we do really go into that in the book, understanding the adolescent so that you can be what they need you to be, and then in that way you can enjoy that phase. Every plane of the child's life could actually be enjoyable. They're challenging parts, but it can actually be enjoyable. I think it just boils down to your understanding and the expectations that come from that understanding.
I could not agree with you more. And I think part of the gift of children is, and you alluded to this a bit, is how much growth we have to do as human beings. I think that's one of the greatest gifts of being an educator is I think I'm a much better person because I've been an educator. And I definitely am a much better person because I am a mom. And I've had to do that spiritual work that Dr. Montessori told us to do in order to show up as the person I want to role model for them rather than just getting to be whoever, right? However the emotions swing me that day. And what a gift for families to have that context as well, that there are no bad ages. It's about understanding them at each point along the way. That's lovely. Okay, so we're going to start now. Let's talk about the elementary years. Dr. Montessori called this the age of rudeness. I've used that line with a few families along the way, and they're always so relieved to hear there's a name for it because all of a sudden I find that that's such a big moment of change for them. Simone, do you want to start off with the elementary age and then and what you share with families for that age specifically?
Yeah, the age of rudeness is so true. And actually a big part, like where the first plane child was constructing themselves as an individual, now you see self-construction as a member of society. And so that social development is such a big piece for that second plane child and why they might push back on us and be rude to us and those kind of things. But we can also be very clear about what's okay to and how we want to be spoken to as well. But I think it's also really interesting how they learn in the second plane, because where they were sensorial learners, now they're using the eyes of the mind. I once heard that expression. I think it's so beautiful because they're using their imagination. And so I think parents also, they're so keen to introduce them to fantasy in the first plane, and we've always said just reality, and all of a sudden finally we can say yes, now you can offer the child things that they can't see in front of them, that they're beyond that, you know, that reality. Introduce them to fantasy, they can understand better what is reality and what's fantasy. And they can also say to them, you know, their imagination is going to be much richer when they've seen towers from all around the world in the first plane, and now they can imagine a tower that we could never have even created before, because they can use that power. And along with that is the big work that we referenced earlier, that they need a lot of space then for big work. So in our homes where they might have, you know, been satisfied with a small little table and a chair, now we might want to remove that table and chair so that there's a big carpet area where they can stretch out and do big work there. Or I love Junnifa's school. They have a beautiful atelier where children really from 3 years old, but they get really busy with it from 6 to 12 age group, where they've got saws and woodwork and they can really build and create big things. So that can be something that the families like might not realize, that they want to take more risks, you know. Risks are really interesting, like teaching them to use fire. How can they light the candles in a safe way? How do we respect fire if we're making a bonfire or something like this in our homes? So there's lots of ways that the families at home will start to experience the second plane child. The fact that they don't have external order, how do we help them navigate still getting to school on time when they may not have the order that they had in the first plane? And yeah, there's so many aspects that I find really fun to see coming to alive, because it is a calmer period. And I always like to say, like, rest assured parents, yes, they might be a bit ruder, but it's much calmer. Like all those the years that you spent saying yes and saying no in the first plane, now your child will know when my parent says yes, they mean yes. When they say no, they say no. And I also teach parents and families to say, let's see, I can't decide right yet, because that's actually really useful too. You don't have to decide always. Nothing's an emergency. Oh, why don't I get some more information and then we can make a decision.
And have will see not actually be just pushing the no down the road.
No, it means that they'll know that means that I'm going to find out. Yeah, definitely a second plane child will follow up on that.
Right? They're so persistent. It's amazing. Junnifa, how about you? Anything you want to add about the elementary age child?
Sure. So definitely for most parents, the first thing is that it's the age of rudeness, because that's what takes them by surprise. I think also that order, you know, the fact that they don't, it seems to, you know, they don't have as much physical order. And so helping parents know that they can develop systems or put things in place that allows the child to be a little more organized, you know, having a place for everything. Then with regards to big work, I think that it's so important to give the child wide open blocks of time where they can explore their interests, where they can read. I think Dr. Montessori said this is the period where they can acquire so much intellectual knowledge. It's actually maybe the highest, you know, the second plane and then the fourth plane. So giving them big blocks of time where they can just read. Now with technology, I find that, you know, more and more parents think that their children have to be on the computer or they have to play games so that they can keep up and they don't fall behind. This is the age so that they'll, you know, I hear from parents a lot that they have to be people of their time and place, and their understanding of that is that they have to be they have to be they have to know how to use technology very well. But I think that when they have blocks of time where they can solve problems, where they can do things, where they can read, where they can learn, where they can make stuff, they're actually learning the skills that will allow them to come into their fullness as digital natives. Because the technology that we're using now, it's probably not the technology that our children will use as adults. We know that the technology that was available when we were their age is not what is available now. But if they're able to problem solve, if they know how to find information, if they know how to solve problems, they will transfer those skills to whatever they find, like whatever tool, whatever technology they have to actually use. I also like to share with parents that for me, if you're introducing your children to technology, it's important to introduce it as a tool instead of as entertainment. to introduce it as something that you use, or instead of something that you consume. I talk to my children a lot about creating versus consuming, so making sure that you're giving the children the opportunity to create instead of just constantly consuming. And I think that when you're telling your children what to do all the time, it's also a form of consuming. But when you give them blocks of times where they can figure out, they're creating their own use of their time. So looking at it in different ways, I think those are big. And then giving them the tools that they need, having access to information, books, a dictionary, atlases, encyclopedia, scissors, large pieces of paper, small pieces of paper, used boxes, things that they can use, wood. And then I think one last thing is also giving them a sense of power. Our children are really, especially as they get to the second half of the elementary, the second plane, so from 9 to 12, they can actually go out, like, so they can go to play, like they can go to the shop, they can go and get a haircut. Those things again make deposit in their sense of self, because it's like you're telling them that I trust you. It's just, I find with my own children and also the children in my class that it just builds their sense of power. So again, back to independence, giving them opportunity to do things beyond what they have been doing. So maybe until now, they've been making dinner, they've been cooking, they've done all those things inside the home environment, giving them opportunity to now explore beyond the home environment, to go to the store, to figure out how to take a taxi or like to take a bus, I don't know, depending on where you're located, to navigate public transportation. And one final thing is, they're in that plane for socialization. They want to be with their friends. So giving them those opportunities and using the opportunity to have conversations about what your values are, conversations about what is right, what is wrong, debriefing when they come back and they share the experience with you, not necessarily prescribing, but listening and talking them through so that they can start to make those analytical judgments about experiences that they have. I know that was a lot of different things in different places, but yes, I hope you, yeah.
Oh, there's so much in there. And I think that our listeners are really going to appreciate all those really practical examples, right? Because this is all things that you all who are listening at home can take straight to your families and help them to understand how important this work is. And I have to tell you that those blocks of time, I think that's one of the key components at all ages of children having that unstructured time. And at least in the United States, it's harder and harder for children to have it now because they're so overscheduled. And so really being protective of and making sure that our lives have room to build those skills, because part of what's happening is when they're overscheduled and there's no time, they don't have time to learn how to think. They don't have time to learn to problem solve. They don't have time for learning how to be creative. And all those parts of the brain don't get developed, and the spirit, right? And what we know is that children need to overcome worthy challenges in order to self-construct. That's how they build their self-esteem. And so how do we provide opportunities for them? Now, it comes in our Montessori settings for sure, but it's one of those pieces that we think a lot about around here, is making sure that our families know that they need that downtime without the screen in front of them, right? That downtime where sometimes in our house, the screens just all disappear. They just all disappear. And we have actually, I know you all are going to talk about this and talk about it in the book, but we have a library system for the devices so they can be checked out and then returned, so that there's an amount of time that's given. And I need this for this purpose for the next 40 minutes. So I'm going to chat with my friends for 40 minutes and then I'll have it back, because otherwise it's all consuming. And so I love all those examples. Thank you, Junnifa. And okay, so we believe it or not, like it's already, the time is already evaporated. Anything else you want people to be thinking about when it comes to planes of development and families, and how do we give them the keys to childhood and all these planes? Is there anything else either of you want to share?
I would just add that, like, through all the planes, the one thing that stays the same is that respect for the child, the love, the understanding, trusting, joy, and acceptance. Like, those things are things that we can bring to our children no matter what the plane of development. Yes, the characteristics of the child change, but there's definitely ways that we can show respect, that we can seek to understand them, that we get to see joy in our child through any plane of development.
Yes, yes, yes. How about you, Junnifa? Anything you'd like to add?
Above all things, love. I think that when we're driven by love, I feel like, yeah, it opens our eyes and our hearts, and helps us to truly see our children, helps our parents to truly see their children. Yeah. And I think also when we're giving these tools to our parents, also understanding that, like, I think you mentioned that earlier, is that everyone is doing the best that they can. So making sure that we're not giving it to them from a judgmental point of view, or giving it to them in a way telling them everything they're doing is wrong. Empathy, understanding, and then offering as a tool, knowing that they're probably doing the best that they can. I think for the longest time, I when I interact with parents, there's this feeling that Montessori teachers don't understand. Like they're so perfect. The parents actually think that the teachers are perfect. They know everything. So making sure that we're not propagating that, because we understand that they are trying their best. And even though we have this tool that we're giving to them, they still know their child. They can know their child better, but they still know their child. And so coming to them with that respect that Simone just spoke about, respect for the children, but also respect for these parents who have entrusted them with their children. And so offering this tool as a gift, as a help, not as a judgment or as yeah. So that's what I would say. And above all, love.
Above all things, love. That's what Dr. Montessori told us. She said it's potent.
Yes, it's also in the Bible. So yes,
it's everywhere, right? It is in every faith and it binds us. So, well, thank you both so much for being here. We're so honored to have you on our podcast. I had shared with Junnifa and Simone beforehand. I was a little nervous, actually, and but you all are so lovely, and I think that you've given us so much to chew on and to think about. I'm looking forward to going back and listening again. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been a pleasure.
It's absolutely a pleasure. And to our listeners, oh, please, Junnifa.
No, I was just saying it's been lovely. Thank you. I too feel like I want to listen to it again.
Right? I think there's going to be so much good. I bet I end up listening to, I have some that I listen to over and over, and every time I'm like, I don't remember hearing that. Oh, that's a good piece. And I think you gave us so much to bring to our families. Really, thank you for that. I always want this to be as practical as possible. And thank you to our listeners for spending your time with us today. Take a look at our website at greenspringcenter.org to view the show notes from today's episode and to get more information about Simone and Junnifa's new book, The Montessori Child, which is included on the show notes page. As a special note, if you live anywhere near Baltimore, Maryland, Simone and Junnifa will be visiting Greenspring for a book talk and signing on Wednesday, March 13th, 2024. You can check out our website for more details. We're so excited to host you both.
We can't wait to be there.
I know, it's going to be great. So thank you all for being here. This work is the work. We are changing the world, and thank you for everything you're doing. Have a great week.